I still remember the day the debt collectors came knocking. The sound of that fist on my apartment door was sharp, deliberate, like it already knew it was about to ruin my life. I opened it expecting a delivery, but instead, a man in a navy suit looked me dead in the eye and asked, "Miss Collins, are you prepared to settle the $2 million balance due under your name?" For a second, I laughed. It was such a ridiculous question that I thought it had to be some kind of prank. $2 million? Me? I was a 34-year-old accountant in Chicago who still checked grocery receipts twice before paying. But when he pulled out the documents with my name, my social security number, and my signature, I felt the air in my chest vanish. My hands started to shake before I could even form a question. That was the moment I realized something terrible had happened, but I didn't know who had done it. Not yet. My name is Emma Collins, and this is the story of how my brother, my own blood, used my social security number to take out $2 million in loans, disappeared into thin air, and left me drowning in debt while my parents told me to just pay it because he's family. And when I finally decided I'd had enough, when I quietly hired the best lawyer in Chicago, and when they dragged him out of his hideout in handcuffs, my mother called crying, "How could you do this to your brother?" That's when I stopped believing that family always means love. Now, before I tell you what I did, you need to understand who we were, the Collins family. On the outside, we looked picture perfect. My dad, Robert Collins, worked as a school principal for 30 years. My mom, Linda, ran a small baking business from home. And then there was Jake, my younger brother by 2 years, the golden boy who could do no wrong. Jake was the kind of person people instantly liked. Handsome, funny, magnetic. He could charm his way through anything, late bills, broken promises, even traffic tickets. Growing up, every time he messed up, my parents would sigh and say, "He's just a dreamer, Emma. You're the responsible one." And I was. I kept the house clean, helped Mom with orders, got straight A's, went to college, paid my loans, built a career. Jake bounced from one get-rich-quick scheme to another. I lent him money more times than I can count. Once he promised to start a car-flipping business. Another time he wanted to invest in crypto. It always ended the same way, with him disappearing for weeks, then showing up with that sheepish grin and Mom saying, "He's family, let it go." And I always did. The last time I saw him, it was a Sunday in early spring. He dropped by unannounced, carrying a coffee and that same crooked smile. We talked about work, taxes, and random life stuff. Then he casually asked, "Hey, what's your middle name again? I need it for something." I laughed and told him. When he asked if I still lived at the same address and if I'd ever changed my bank, I thought it was just small talk. It wasn't. That day, I had no idea he was taking notes, not for a gift, not for something sweet, but to destroy my financial life. When I replay that conversation now, I see all the red flags I missed. The way his tone tightened when I mentioned I'd paid off my student loans. The way his eyes flickered when I said my credit score was finally perfect. He knew what that meant. He knew I was the perfect target. And when I opened that door months later to the man holding those papers, everything clicked. The fake signatures, the old address, the slightly misspelled middle name, all of it screamed Jake. But the shock wasn't even the worst part. It was what came after. When I called my parents in tears, my mom's voice didn't sound surprised, just tired. "Emma," she said softly, "your brother's been struggling. If he used your name, I'm sure he didn't mean harm." I almost dropped the phone. "Didn't mean harm? He took out $2 million in my name, Mom." "Sweetheart," she whispered, "you're good with money. Just help him. We'll figure it out together." That's when I realized something far more painful than fraud had happened. My family had chosen him over me, again. So I stopped crying. I took a deep breath, and in that quiet, broken moment, I made a promise to myself. If they wouldn't protect me, I'd protect myself. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, I didn't beg. I just said, "Okay, Mom," and hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by papers with my forged signature, and whispered the words that would change everything. "I'm done being the responsible one. Now I'll be the strong one." That was the beginning of the end, because 3 weeks later, when the police dragged Jake out of a dusty motel in handcuffs, the world finally saw the truth. But for my family, I was still the villain. Before everything fell apart, my life was quiet, predictable, the kind of routine that makes you feel safe without realizing how fragile that safety really is. I lived in a small one-bedroom apartment in downtown Chicago, worked as an accountant for a mid-size firm, and spent most of my weekends organizing bills, grocery lists, and my tiny balcony garden. I wasn't rich, but I was proud. Everything I had, I'd earned with my own hands. My parents were always my soft spot. I visited them every Sunday after church. Mom would make her famous blueberry pie, and Dad would sit in his recliner watching football, pretending not to listen while Mom and I chatted. Those were my peace days, until Jake walked in. Jake had a way of changing the atmosphere in any room. 1 second, everything was calm, and the next, it was like gravity shifted toward him. My mom's eyes would light up, my dad would sit up straighter. And suddenly, I wasn't the daughter who brought home pies or steady paychecks. I was just the sister of the golden boy. Jake was 2 years younger, but he lived like rules were made for other people. He'd tried college and dropped out, tried real estate, quit after 2 months, tried day trading, poker, crypto, whatever sounded glamorous for the moment. Every time it failed, he'd say, I just need one more chance. And every time, Mom would cover for him. I remember one Christmas when he maxed out my parents' credit card to buy gifts for everyone. When the bill arrived, he laughed and said, "It's Christmas, not tax season, Em." Mom brushed it off. Dad muttered something about responsibility, but no one ever stopped him. I used to think I was just unlucky to have a brother like him. But later, I realized the real problem wasn't Jake. It was the ecosystem of excuses that kept him untouchable. One Sunday, about a year before the fraud was exposed, I sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee when Jake burst through the door. He looked tired but still had that careless grin. "Em, my favorite sister," he joked, even though I was his only one. He hugged Mom, kissed her cheek, and said, "You look amazing, Ma. Lost weight?" It was his way. Flattery first, chaos later. I noticed his phone kept buzzing. He turned it face down every time it lit up. I didn't think much of it then, but I remember the unease creeping in. "So, Em," he said, leaning back, "you still working at that finance place?" "Yeah," I replied cautiously. "Why?" he shrugged. "Just asking. You always were the brain in the family. I could never do all that money math stuff." Mom smiled proudly. "Your sister's keeping this family respectable." Jake laughed. "Good. Someone has to." It felt like a joke, but there was something behind his tone. Envy, maybe, or resentment. Then he started asking strange questions. "Do you still have that bank account with Mid-City? Didn't you say your credit score's like perfect now? What's your middle initial again? For taxes or something?" At the time, I brushed it off. That's what happens when you grow up in a family that dismisses every gut feeling you have. You learn to doubt yourself before doubting them. Back then, I was dating someone, Daniel. A kind, quiet guy who always told me, "You carry too much for people who wouldn't carry half for you." He wasn't wrong, but I didn't want to believe him. He'd see how my mom would guilt me into helping Jake with small loans, and how I'd end up covering his missed payments. I remember one night Daniel said softly, "Em, you've got to stop being the safety net. He'll never learn if you keep catching him." I told him, "He's my brother. I can't just watch him fall." Daniel looked at me for a long moment before replying, "Maybe it's not him falling anymore. Maybe it's you." That line would come back to haunt me later. I wanted to believe things were getting better. Jake said he'd gotten a job in marketing, something big. Mom bragged about it at church. "Jake's finally turning his life around," she told anyone who'd listen. I smiled and nodded, pretending to believe it too. But there were moments, small, eerie ones, that didn't fit the story. Once, when I stopped by my parents' house unannounced, I found Jake in the backyard pacing with his phone, whispering, "No, use her name. She won't find out." When he saw me, he froze for half a second before smiling too wide. "Em, just business talk, don't worry." I laughed it off, because that's what we did in our family. We laughed things off until they exploded. Looking back, I think the worst part wasn't the theft itself. It was that deep, unspoken knowledge that this family would never hold him accountable. When Jake messed up, it was, he's trying. When I got upset, it was, "Emma, don't be dramatic." When I succeeded, it was, "You're lucky you're smart." Everything had an excuse, except for me. I was the standard everyone used to prove he wasn't a failure. That's why when the collectors finally showed up, when the papers said Emma Collins owes $237,000, I didn't just lose money. I lost my place in the family. Because that night, when I called Mom crying, she didn't ask how he could do this. She asked how I could let it get this far. That's when I knew. This wasn't just fraud. This was betrayal wrapped in blood, signed with my own name. It started with envelopes, thin, white, harmless-looking envelopes that appeared in my mailbox one after another. At first, I thought they were spam. Then one afternoon, I noticed the bold black letters stamped across the top of one. Final notice. I tore it open standing in the hallway, coat still on, keys in hand. The words blurred as I read them. Delinquent balance $187,000. Immediate action required. My first thought wasn't panic. It was disbelief. I assumed there had been a clerical error, maybe a wrong address. I called the number listed and explained patiently, "I think you've got the wrong person." But the woman on the line hesitated. "Ma'am, can you confirm your social security number?" I did. She repeated it back perfectly. Then she said, "This account was opened in your name last August." My knees went weak. "That's not possible," I said. "I didn't open any loan. I don't even borrow money." There was silence, then the sound of typing. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "we have 15 open loans connected to this number, totaling approximately $2 million. The phone almost slipped from my hand. I could hear my pulse in my ears. 2 million? 15 loans? It made no sense. I hung up and immediately logged into my credit report. What I saw made my stomach twist. Bank after bank, account after account, each one carrying my name. Someone had built an entire financial empire pretending to be me. That night I didn't sleep. I pulled out every folder I owned, old tax forms, bank statements, bills, and spread them across my bed. I called every financial institution listed and heard the same thing again and again. "Yes, Ms. Collins, the account is in your name. Yes, we verified your identity. Yes, the documents match your signature." Except it wasn't my signature. It was close, painfully close, but just a little off. The C in Collins curved differently. The E in Emma was looped wrong. My heart knew what my mind refused to say out loud. There was only one person who could have pulled this off: Jake. The realization hit like a punch to the ribs. I sat in silence for almost an hour staring at my kitchen wall. Every strange question he'd asked, my middle name, my address, my bank, my credit score, it all replayed in my head like a cruel montage. He hadn't been making conversation. He'd been collecting data. But the next morning, I drove to my parents' house gripping a folder full of evidence like it was a weapon. When Mom opened the door, her smile faded the second she saw my face. "Emma, what's wrong?" I didn't answer. I walked past her into the living room and dropped the folder on the table. "You need to see this." Dad muted the TV, confused. Mom sat down beside him as I spread out the papers. Copies of forged applications, fake pay slips, loan approvals, all under my name. Mom's lips parted slightly. "What is this?" "It's Jake," I said, my voice shaking. "He used my social security number. He forged everything. $2 million, Mom. He's ruined my life." Her face went pale, but not in shock, more like guilt, like she already knew. "Emma," she whispered, "you don't know that." "Yes, I do," I snapped. "The handwriting is his. The address he used. It's his old apartment. He even used your phone number as the secondary contact." Dad rubbed his forehead. "Em, calm down. Maybe this can be fixed quietly." "Quietly?" I stared at him in disbelief. "They're freezing my accounts, Dad. My credit's gone. My job's on the line. How do you fix that quietly?" Mom reached for my hand. "Honey, he must have been desperate. You're the strong one, the stable one. Can't you just help him pay it off until he gets back on his feet?" I pulled my hand away like it burned. "You want me to pay $2 million for a crime he committed?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "He's your brother." That was it. That was always the answer. No matter what he did, wreck a car, steal money, lie, vanish, he was my brother. the golden child, whose mistakes were always forgiven, and I was the responsible one expected to clean them up. I left the house shaking. When I got into my car, I screamed, not a quiet cry, a full guttural scream that came from years of swallowing anger. The following days were chaos. Collectors started calling my office. My boss pulled me aside, worried about public image concerns. I tried explaining, but who believes someone who says it wasn't me? It was my brother using my identity? Then came the worst blow. My landlord handed me a notice. My rent check had bounced. My accounts were frozen. I was officially broke in my own name. I tried calling Jake dozens of times, straight to voicemail. I texted him, "Jake, I know what you did. You need to fix this before I go to the police." No reply. By day 5, I realized he was gone. Vanished completely, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a betrayal, carefully planned, perfectly executed. I had been robbed by the one person I'd defended all my life, and now everyone I loved was defending him instead. That night, sitting alone in the dark with a mountain of debt letters at my feet, I realized something terrifying. The people who were supposed to protect me were part of the reason I kept getting hurt. That was the night I stopped being their daughter and started being my own protector. The night everything broke inside me wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet. Too quiet. I sat on my kitchen floor surrounded by envelopes, bills, and debt collection letters, spread out like crime scene evidence. The only light came from the stove clock, glowing 2:17 a.m. I had nothing left in me to cry. I just stared at the papers, my hands trembling as I picked up one that said, "Notice of intent to repossess assets." That's when I whispered to myself, "No more." For weeks I had begged, explained, and defended myself to people who didn't want to listen. I'd been humiliated at work, cornered by collectors, and gaslit by my own family. My parents refused to even say Jake's name. To them, I was the problem, for daring to hold him accountable. But that night, something shifted. My fear turned into anger. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that burns cold and steady. I remember standing up, taking a deep breath, and saying out loud to the empty room, "If no one's going to protect me, I'll protect myself." On the next morning, I took the day off work. I Googled every fraud and identity theft attorney in Chicago, scrolling past cheap ads until I found a name that kept popping up. Laura Hayes, senior partner at a law firm known for taking down corporate scammers and financial criminals. Her clients included banks, politicians, even whistleblowers. She was expensive, but I didn't care. At that point, I had nothing left to lose except my name. When I walked into her office, I felt like a fraud myself. Exhausted, pale, hair tied in a messy bun, dark circles under my eyes. But Laura didn't judge. She listened. She didn't interrupt or sugarcoat. When I told her it was my brother who had done it, she leaned forward, eyes calm and sharp. "Emma," she said quietly, "if what you're saying is true, you're the victim of a federal crime. Family or not, this is identity theft on a massive scale." I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. "I just want my life back." She folded her hands. "Then let's get it." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Laura's team immediately went to work. Subpoenas, credit record requests, digital footprint tracking. She told me something that stuck with me. Fraud leaves fingerprints, not the kind you see, but the kind you feel when you look close enough. We started with emails. I gave her everything: old messages, shared family accounts, even an old Gmail Jake once used for business. Within days, her tech team found traces of application forms sent from his laptop. Then came the kicker. Every loan application had been logged under the same IP address, my parents' home Wi-Fi. That detail hit me like a slap. My parents' house, my childhood home. It wasn't just betrayal, it was invasion. Laura noticed my silence. "You okay?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I didn't think it would hurt this much to be right." She nodded. "Justice hurts before it heals." How we spent the next week collecting everything: bank statements, voice recordings from debt collectors, photocopies of fake pay slips, even Jake's old handwritten notes I'd kept from years ago. Laura compared the handwriting. "He's sloppy," she said. Didn't think anyone would look this close?" Her voice was calm, but I could see she was furious at the injustice. When we were ready, she filed an official complaint with the Federal Trade Commission and contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. It felt surreal, like watching a movie about someone else's life. I called my parents to tell them what I'd done. Mom picked up. "Emma, what is it now?" "I hired a lawyer," I said. "We're filing charges against Jake." There was silence, then the sharp intake of breath I'd been expecting. "Emma," she said sternly, "you can't do that. He's your brother." "No, Mom," I said, voice steady for the first time. "He's a criminal." "Sweetheart, you're overreacting. He'll come around. He'll fix this. Don't ruin his life over some paperwork." "Paperwork?" I snapped. "He destroyed my credit, my reputation, my peace. I could go to jail for something I didn't even do." Her voice cracked. "You'll tear this family apart." I took a deep breath and said softly, "Then maybe it needs to be torn apart." And I hung up. Himbeaus. From that moment, everything became strategy. Laura prepared affidavits, coordinated with law enforcement, and traced Jake's last financial activity. He'd withdrawn large sums from accounts opened in my name and transferred them to a fake company he'd registered under his. He wasn't just hiding, he was living comfortably somewhere with my money, my credit, and my identity. Every day brought a new discovery, a new betrayal. But oddly, with every truth uncovered, I grew stronger. By the third week, Laura called me in. "We found him." "Where?" I asked, my pulse racing. "Outside Las Vegas, cheap motel. Been there for a month. We've contacted federal agents. They'll move in soon." I closed my eyes and exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. That night, as I sat alone by the window, city lights glowing below, I whispered the same words that had started it all. No more. No more excuses. No more silence. No more being the family scapegoat. I knew the next call would change everything. Either I'd finally get my justice or I'd lose my family forever. But for once, I was ready to pay that price. Because I finally understood. Silence doesn't keep peace. It only protects the guilty. The morning it all went down, Chicago was wrapped in a cold, gray drizzle, the kind that made everything feel heavier. My phone buzzed at 6:42 a.m. It was Laura. Her voice was calm, deliberate, but there was something sharp beneath it. "They got him," she said. For a moment I couldn't speak. The words hung in the air like a foreign language. "Got who?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Jake Collins. Federal agents picked him up at a motel just outside Las Vegas. He tried to run, but they had him surrounded. He's in custody." The world seemed to tilt for a second. I sat down on the edge of my bed, pressing the phone to my ear as if it could make the reality sink in faster. Jake, my brother, the one everyone swore would come around someday, was finally caught. Laura continued, "They found fake IDs, burner phones, and documents under your name. He was planning to leave the country." I let out a shaky breath. "So, it's over?" "It's beginning," she said. "But yes, you're safe now." The story hit the local news within hours. Chicago man arrested in $2 million identity fraud scheme. They didn't use my name, but anyone who knew our family could connect the dots. My phone started blowing up. Coworkers, old friends, neighbors, even Daniel. Everyone wanted to know if it was true. But the call that I dreaded most came from my mother. "Emma." Her voice was breaking, somewhere between anger and tears. "What have you done?" "What I had to," I said quietly. "How could you do this to your brother?" she cried. "They dragged him out like some kind of animal the neighbors saw. Your father's humiliated." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. "Mom, he stole from me. He stole my life. I warned you. You could have handled this privately," she shouted. "He's family, Emma. You don't hand your family to the police." "Then what do you do, Mom?" My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. "You let them destroy you? You sit there and smile while they ruin everything you've worked for? You told me to pay his debt, to clean up his mess, to keep the peace. But peace built on silence isn't peace, it's punishment." She went quiet, just the sound of her breathing through the receiver. "Please," she whispered, "he's your brother." I swallowed hard. and I'm your daughter, but that never seemed to matter. I hung up before she could say another word. E. That afternoon, Laura called again. They're transferring him back to Chicago for arraignment. The press will probably get photos. I thought I was ready to face it, but when I saw the image online later that night, my hands started to shake. Jake in handcuffs, head down, wearing the same leather jacket he'd worn the last time we'd spoken. His face wasn't angry. It was hollow, like someone who'd run out of lies. For a moment, I didn't feel victory. I felt grief. Because the little brother I once protected, the boy who used to make me laugh until I cried, had become a stranger I helped put behind bars. But then I saw the caption, "Suspect accused of stealing sister's identity." And something inside me steadied. That single word, sister, was all the reminder I needed of who the real victim was. A week later, I attended the preliminary hearing. Jake sat at the defense table, looking smaller than I remembered. When the judge entered, he didn't even glance at me. His lawyer requested bail. The prosecutor opposed, citing risk of flight. The judge agreed. Jake's head jerked up, eyes wide. For the first time, I saw fear on his face. Real fear. As the guards let him out, he finally looked at me. There was no apology, no regret, just disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend that I had finally chosen myself over him. Our eyes locked for a second, and I almost felt sorry for him until I remembered the $2 million, the sleepless nights, the collectors banging on my door. The pity evaporated. And when I walked out of the courthouse, reporters tried to shout questions, cameras flashing, but Laura stepped in front of me. "Keep walking," she whispered. "You don't owe anyone an explanation." Outside, the air smelled like rain. I tilted my head back, letting the drizzle hit my face. For the first time in months, the world felt clean again. But later that evening, my phone buzzed one more time. It was Mom. "Emma," she said softly, "your father and I... We can't believe you'd turn your back on your family like this." "I didn't," I said calmly. "They turned their backs on me the moment they decided his comfort mattered more than my pain." Her voice broke. "You've changed." "Maybe I finally have." That night, I sat alone in my apartment. No letters, no threats, no chaos, just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't choke, it heals. I thought about everything that had happened, the debt, the betrayal, the trial ahead. I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through handcuffs clicking shut, through tears on a mother's phone call, through the quiet steadiness of finally standing up for yourself. And as I closed my eyes, I realized something I should have known long ago. Family isn't about blood. It's about loyalty. And the moment they betrayed mine, they stopped being my family. The weeks after Jake's arrest felt strangely hollow, like the silence that follows a long, violent storm. There was no chaos now, no phone calls demanding money, no letters from debt collectors, no footsteps outside my door that made me flinch, just quiet. The kind of quiet that's supposed to bring peace, but at first only reminded me of everything I'd lost. My parents stopped speaking to me, completely. One day, I was their dependable daughter, the one who handled the bills, remembered birthdays, fixed their tech problems. The next, I was a stranger. The family group chat went silent. My calls went unanswered. When I dropped by their house to return some of my old things, the door stayed closed. Through the glass, I saw my mother's figure move past the hallway, but never come to the door. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. I had always been the one trying to hold that family together, the peacekeeper, the mediator, the fixer. But after everything, I realized peacekeeping had just meant keeping quiet while they broke me. Yami's trial took place 6 months later. By then, the case had made local headlines. The prosecutors had every piece of evidence: emails, bank transfers, IP logs, even fake business registrations in my name. When I took the witness stand, I looked straight ahead, refusing to look at him. My lawyer had warned me it would be emotional, but I didn't expect the wave that hit when the judge said the words, 8 years in federal prison. Jake's face stayed blank, but his eyes flickered toward me just once. That look, half disbelief, half resentment, burned into me. It wasn't an apology. It was a question he'd never dare ask out loud. How could you do this to me? And in my heart, I whispered the answer. Because you already did it to me first. After the sentencing, Laura hugged me. "It's over," she said softly. But it didn't feel like over. It felt like beginning again from scratch, with no family, no trust, no sense of home. I had to rebuild everything. My credit, my job reputation, my confidence. It took months of paperwork, phone calls, and legal appeals to erase Jake's fraudulent records. Slowly, the banks reversed the charges. My accounts were restored. My credit score crawled back up. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reclaiming my name. One evening, while sorting through old documents, I found a photo from when Jake and I were kids. We were sitting on a pier, holding melting ice cream cones, grinning with our legs dangling over the water. Back then, he wasn't the man who would ruin my life. He was just my little brother, who was afraid of deep water. I stared at that photo for a long time before sliding it back into the drawer. That memory didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to a version of him that no longer existed. Months later, something unexpected happened. I received a letter from Jake. It came through his lawyer, written in slanted handwriting I recognized instantly. "Emma, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I never thought it would go that far. I was desperate. I thought I could fix it before you found out. I'm sorry I made you the villain to save myself." I didn't cry. I just folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and set it in a box labeled evidence. That's all it was to me now. Proof of what desperation and entitlement can do when love goes unchecked. Life eventually found a new rhythm. I started volunteering at a local identity theft recovery group, helping others rebuild what they'd lost, not just financially, but emotionally. I met people who'd been betrayed by strangers, partners, even parents. Each story echoed a truth I'd learned the hard way. Betrayal hurts deepest when it wears a familiar face. One evening, after a session, a woman told me through tears, "I wish I had your strength." I smiled gently and said, "You don't find it. You build it after everything else is gone." And I meant it. Never came around. Not when Jake went to prison. Not when my name was cleared. Not when I bought my new house and invited them to see it. The silence between us became permanent. Sometimes I wonder if they miss me, or if they miss the version of me who kept cleaning up their son's messes. Either way, I've stopped waiting for their approval. Sunday afternoon, I went back to the lake where Jake and I used to fish as kids. The sun was low, the water calm. I sat on the same old dock, legs crossed, eyes on the reflection rippling across the surface. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Real peace. Not the fragile, temporary kind that depends on keeping everyone happy, but the kind that comes from knowing you stood up for yourself when no one else would. I whispered to the water, "I forgive you, Jake, but I'll never forget." Then I stood, brushed off my jeans, and walked away, leaving behind the ghosts of loyalty that once held me prisoner. When I locked my car, my phone buzzed with a message from one of the women at the support group. It said, "Thank you for giving me hope." And that's when I finally understood the purpose behind all of it. The pain, the loss, the loneliness. It wasn't to break me. It was to rebuild me into someone stronger, someone who could turn her own survival into someone else's guide. Because in the end, family isn't the people who share your blood. It's the people who see your scars and still choose to stand beside you. And when I looked in the mirror that night, I realized something beautiful. For the first time in my life, I was my own family. When I look back on everything that happened, the betrayal, the silence, the tears, I don't see a tragedy anymore. I see transformation. I learned that sometimes the people you'd take a bullet for are the ones quietly loading the gun. And when that happens, you don't need revenge. You need release. I walked through the fire of my own family's betrayal, and I came out carrying my own light. Not everyone who shares your blood deserves your loyalty. Sometimes, family isn't who you're born with. It's who stands beside you when the world turns its back. So if this story touched your heart, or if you've ever been hurt by someone you trusted, remember, your strength doesn't come from who left you. It comes from who you become after they're gone. If you like this story, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. I'd love to know your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real, emotional stories about truth, betrayal, and redemption. Your support helps keep these stories alive.